Okay, it is 4 o'clock, and we will call the July 13th Salina City Commission meeting to order. I would ask staff for confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, we will have roll call.
Mayor Hoppick.
Here.
Commissioner Davis.
Here.
Commissioner France.
Here.
Commissioner Hodges. Here. Commissioner Ryan.
Here.
Thank you. With that, would all that are able please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have no awards or proclamations today. So with that, we will move into the Citizens Forum. This is a chance for individuals to come forward and discuss something that is not on the agenda. We ask that you please give your name and address and limit your comments to 5 minutes. Is there anyone who wishes to come forward?
Is the face mask on the agenda?
No. This would be the
I'd ask for permission to remove this while I'm speaking, and I'll put it back on right afterwards. Is that okay or not?
Yeah, I believe you'll need to leave it on.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm a good man.
Name and...
Clark Sanders, 2096 Leland Way.
Thank you.
I'm a good man, but I've done things that are wrong and for which I'm ashamed. I've met all of you outside of this setting. I think you're all good people who want to do things in your heart. You want to do the right thing. However, a week ago today, you did something very wrong, and you as a commission should be ashamed of yourselves. I will explain. You passed a face mask required ordinance complete with monetary fines. Not having a face mask ordinance may or may not be the right thing. Personally, I believe that an objective examination of the data available in Salina, Saline County, which among other things reveals that the survival rate from COVID-19 in Salina, Saline County is 99.9963%. I think this is not the health crisis that you're making it out to be. But having such an ordinance is not where you failed. The shameful thing you did was how you passed this ordinance. There is a procedure for how to do city business. You stood that procedure on its head. And procedure is important. You all know that. If we were in a debate, you would all stipulate to that. So how did you fail in terms of procedure? You failed to put this issue on your agenda. You failed to give adequate notice to the public that the face mask issue was going to be discussed, let alone voted on. You had both the first and second readings and votes seconds apart. Normal procedure is to have the first reading 1 week and the second reading a second week. You even tried to get this ordinance to take effect immediately. Now, fortunately, you were advised that you couldn't do that because you had to have it published in the newspaper of record first. You indicated that it was your intent not to fine people, but to warn them first before they would be cited. But monetary fines are literally spelled out in the frequently asked documents on your website: $25 for the first violation, $50 for the second, $100 for the third and subsequent violations. And by the way, have you read that document, the FAQ? It's so confusing that even a mediocre lawyer, let a good one, would have a field day with it if anything ever went to court. So now what? Do the right thing. Do the right thing the right way. Number one, repeal this ordinance today. Number 2, have a joint meeting with the county commission and get on the same page. Number 3, hold at least one and preferably 2 or 3 town hall meetings, giving the public sufficient and adequate notice that these meetings are taking place when and where. I suggest outdoors at either the Eric Stein Stage in Oakdale Park or at the gazebo in Jerry Ivy Park. Number 4, give your legal advisors adequate time to examine what you eventually come up with as to protect the city legally. I will close with this. You seem to think that this is about public health and your desire to keep the public safe. But I'm telling you, it's about freedom. Should I be free to decide if I put something on my body? Should a business be free to decide whether or not they want to require face masks to be worn in their business? Give us our liberty. I will close with this. To quote one of this nation's great founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty or safety. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, do we have anyone else that would like to come forward during Citizens Forum?
Luke Stanford, and I'm a resident of Salina. So first, I just want to touch on what Mr. Sanders said. And while he disagrees with you, I just want to say that what you did makes me very proud to be a member of this community, and it makes me very proud to call this my home and that I was raised here. So I just want to thank you for what you did and putting public health first. But the second point I had was just I was wanting to talk about how the policy proposal would look on the 20th. We had some ideas on how we could present that. We were thinking that Santiago and myself could take these 2 seats right here because we have a lot of documents that we wanted in front of us to be looking at. And we were hoping that we'd be proposing and talking about the documents with you here. The policy proposal we'd already have sent in advance and you'd already have in front of you as well. And we'd like to be able to call some of our members to talk as well on certain issues. Would that be okay with you guys?
Go ahead.
We'll look at the document and see how we want to because we'll get that, on Thursday?
Yeah, because I was just wondering how that policy proposal would look like, so I was just wondering if there's any preferences
Usually when
that
we
you
do
guys
a
had on
blue
that.
sheet, there's a staff presentation. We haven't got that far yet, so.
Okay.
But actually, we're waiting on you in terms of what you said you'd be providing.
Yeah, because we said we'd present it on the 15th to you, get to you by the 15th.
Right.
And so do we have to wait until the 15th to find out how that's going to look, the proposal and everything, or?
Well, having an understanding of what it is you would present will help me answer your questions.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. All right, I was just checking on that. All right, and that's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Norman Mantle, Salina, Kansas. I echo what Mr. Sanders said. I appreciate it. I'm turning my back on you. I'm ignoring you. That's another issue. But I agree with what Mr. Sanders said. We're supposed to be a nation of laws. But some people seem to ignore these laws. We've got an election coming up for a prosecuting attorney. I would like to discuss this with these attorneys. If an attorney would sign a contract with the people that he will arrest and prosecute elected officials, government employees, government supervisors who violate our laws. Have him sign a contract with the people. If he does not do this, he will resign his position, he will give up his law license, and he will spend time in jail. We need a prosecuting attorney that will prosecute our elected officials who violate our laws. We are a nation of laws. That question needs to be put forward to these 2 prosecuting attorneys, candidates. Also, last week the subject was mentioned about the Police Advisory Board. This board, who's it made up of? Are there people of minorities on it? Are there people from the black community on this board? Are there people from the Latino, Mexican board? Who's on this board? This board should be comprised of people from across the general public. These people live here. So, how many other people that are on this board? Are there people from the legal community? Are there people from law enforcement? If I was a law enforcement person, which I'm not, but if I was on this board, my vote could be slanted. When I have jurisdiction, I make the own laws for my own department. That's a conflict. The Supreme Court has people of different races on it. Why don't we have it on this board? We have a minority on the City Commission board. We've had minorities on the City Commission before in the previous past. So I question the makeup of the board.
Thank you.
Commissioners, just as
Yeah.
a point of clarification, not wanting to get into a just philosophical or legal disagreement, but you violated no law in the action that you took. Process and procedure-wise, there's an expectation, which Mr. Sanders communicated, but you followed the applicable statutes as well as your own rules of procedure. Just want to be clear, you did not violate any law.
Yeah. And I didn't get it to debate, but there are minorities that sit on that board also, and we're going to review that board, so. Any other?
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Pappy. I'm a resident of Salina and a student in the KU a graduate student in the KU School of Social Welfare. I've exchanged emails with several of you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to introduce myself in person and speak with you today. So, sometime last week, I was looking through the presentation Chief Nelson shared at the forum. And one of the sides explains that, as currently structured, the Law Enforcement Advisory Board is exempt from the Kansas Open Meetings Act, and he quotes the city attorney to that effect. It also mentions that Chief Hill received the same opinion from legal counsel back in 2007. And it occurred to me that Chief Hill, or someone at the department, must have asked whether the board had to be open to the public. I realize that might seem fairly obvious, but sitting there, it occurred to me that that question must have been posed as opposed to whether it should be offered to the public and open to the public, which is a profoundly different question and perhaps a more important one. It was disappointing to imagine the police department asking whether a legally mandated board intended to address racial discrimination was subject to laws that strengthen our democracy. It is even more frustrating that the answer they received was technically no, and that's what they ran with. Despite listing preservation and advancement of the principles of democracy, a dependence upon community involvement, and accountability to the people it serves as values at the core of their operational philosophy, the department took advantage of a technicality in 2007, and it stands by that decision today, citing its continued legal validity. At least that's what I understood from the presentation. The thing is, there's a gap between what's legally required and what is moral or ethical. Or as an organization of police executives put it, there's a gulf between policies and practices that meet the minimum requirements of the Constitution and those perceived as legitimate in the community. And when police officers, or city officials for that matter, fail to appreciate that gap and fail to demonstrate a commitment to the community's shared values, they compromise the legitimacy of their authority. Now, to be clear, they don't lose that authority. Instead, they lose the trust and respect that inspires normative compliance, that is, the willingness to cooperate from the general public. Chief Nelson acknowledged as much later in the presentation when he lists, quote, a loss of community trust and law enforcement legitimacy among the reasons for decreased interest in law enforcement careers. These two statements, the attorney's explanation and a reference to perceived illegitimacy, are separated by maybe 15 slides, but I hope that the irony is not lost on you. My intention is not to bash the police. I don't mean to label them hypocrites. I appreciate their service, and I know that the majority do so with honor. But these things are worth pointing out. We must be willing to confront institutional shortcomings when they are identified. No authority should be exempt from its responsibility to the people. I don't know whether the LEAB was intentionally structured to minimize public access, and I try not to make those kinds of assumptions. Whether intentional or not, it failed to promote transparency, and the SPD missed a terrific opportunity to exercise their values, to foster community trust, and improve perceived legitimacy. It is my sincere hope that you do not miss this opportunity to build a more just and fair Salina, and that you mind the gap between the requirements of your office and the needs of the community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I would ask, and it happened earlier, we have it before, in our meeting notes, as far as order of business, we will not allow clapping. That's happened before, and no clapping, no booing. We'll just continue to carry on meeting in a professional manner, if we could, please. So, thank you. Anyone else?
Commissioners, I was
Name, please.
Dalton McDowell, 514 South Ninth. I was just looking at what Melissa Hodges put on Facebook in June. Why are we spending millions on legal for the attorney for your counsel when we have a city prosecutor in her office that can do the same thing? Why would you spend millions on an outside agency to do your legals during your council meetings?
Dalton, this is your opportunity to make comments. We're not going to get into answering questions. I'll tell you right away, they do different jobs, for one thing. So there's a completely different job for them. But go ahead and give us your comments, if you would.
And then I was up on Indian Rock today by the park. Has that park been mowed at all this year? Some areas look like it has, but some areas are pretty tall. Is the park stretched that thin that they can't keep up at least on half the mowing? The Parks Department stretched that thin?
Again, we're not going to get into answering questions. We are working part staff. Thank you. Okay, do we have anyone else that would like to address the commission under the Citizens Forum? Okay, if not, we will move into the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of July 6th, 2020.
Okay, well, we have two consent agenda items.
I'm sorry, 6.2, resolution number 20-7843, appointing members to the Salina Leverage Lender, Inc.
Okay. Do we have any commissioners who would like to remove any of the consent agendas items?
Mayor, I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda items 6.1 and 6.2. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The consent agenda passes 5-0. We will move into administration.
Item 7.1, resolution number 20-7841, authorizing the city manager to execute agreements for acquisition and authorizing the mayor to execute acceptances of the public utility easements needed for the South Well Field and Water Treatment Plant Improvement Project, project number 70019, and the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, project number 2917.
Thank you. Ms. Tasker.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Martha Tasker, Director of Utilities. Sound like a broken record, but Salina receives about 60% of its raw water supply from the Smoky Hill River and the remaining 40% from the downtown well fields. 2006, Salina experienced a historic drought event, resulted in the Smoky Hill River running dry. And when that happens, virtually the raw water supply for our city is very limited. This also occurred in 2012 and 2018. However, the river didn't run dry because the city of Salina and the irrigators that use water out of the river were working together to prevent that. But it is a situation that reoccurs. Based on that experience, the City Commission approved a raw water supply study which evaluated the city's existing water supply system and recommended improvements to the system to provide water during droughts through the year 2060, about a 50-year plan. The raw water supply study included the South Wellfield and Water Treatment Plant. That's a design-build project, and it's currently under construction. In your packet, there's an 11 by 17 fold-out drawing. Tried to put it on the screen, but it really wasn't all that visible, so I'll try to describe it as I go through it for those watching from home or sitting in the audience. The project includes a 3.5 million gallon a day water plant, rehabilitating 4 wells. Those are located along Waterwell Road and installing raw water piping from these existing wells to the new treatment plant. The raw water pipe runs along the north and south side of Waterwell Road, switches back and forth. It's based on where do we have easements and the topography of the ground. Sometimes the side slopes of the roads are such we couldn't construct on them, so it's back and forth. Then we're also installing a public sewer line from the treatment plant to along the south side of Waterwell Road, and then it goes north along Progress Drive to the northeast corner of Crestwood in that vicinity. And then we also have a finished water line that runs from the treatment plant side along the north side of Waterwell Road, and again goes north near Progress Drive and Crestwood all the way north to Schilling Road. So a lot of lines outside of the treatment plant site. Notice to proceed for the construction of the water treatment plant site was issued in February of 2019. The notice to proceed for the work related to the piping and all of the facilities outside the fence around the treatment plant, we were not sure exactly of routes or where we would need easements. So once that final design is done, we now have those decisions made. Staff and the city surveyor determined, with legal counsel's help, exactly what easements we need and how best to pursue those. Each of the property owners received a letter from the utilities department. We detailed their rights. The Federal Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policy Act of 1970 is a requirement we have to follow because of the State Revolving Loan Fund, which is our funding mechanism. The letter that we sent out included the city's offer for the compensation, and it was based on appraisal of the South Water Treatment Plant by Martin's Appraisal, and that was done in November of 2017. 41.9 acre tract, roughly $6,300 per acre. Each property has accepted the city's offer for compensation. Of course, it's conditioned upon City Commission's approval. Once we have your approval, then the agreement and the permanent utility easements will be sent to the property owners for their signature. The Kansas Public Water Supply Loan Fund requires the authorized city representative must certify that all necessary real property has been acquired, and the cost for land and easements cannot be included in the loan fund loan. So for these easements, we need 7 tracts of property and 4 property owners. And these must be acquired prior to us beginning the construction of those off-site utilities. One property owner is Daniel Little and Alexis Gasper. They have 1 tract for $500. Douglas F. Bradley Trust, 2 tracts with a total of $4,716. Land Institute, we're looking at 3 tracts, total of $1,700, and the Isaacson Family Trust of $2,500. Many of these tracts are located in the road access easement, and they are pieces of property that's there for the road access. For us to use them for utilities, we have to get an additional easement, which is what we spent our effort accomplishing here.
I think on the
Yeah.
Isaacson, you meant 250, not 2,500, didn't you?
What did I say?
2,500.
Well,
I just didn't want them to hear that and think they were going to get a bigger check.
No, I'm pretty
down
sure
there.
Vaughn is very familiar with their number. We've talked to him quite a bit before. That's actually for a 20 by 20 piece of property under the road right-of-way.
So it is the 250.
It's 250,
Okay,
so.
thank you.
I'm
Okay.
speaking out of turn. Thank you for catching me. If the governing body authorizes this payment of $7,166, the source of funds will come from the city's Water Capital Reserve Fund. Staff has identified 3 options. The first would be to approve resolution number 20-7841, authorizing the city manager to execute agreements and authorizing the mayor to execute acceptance of the public utility easements for the South Wellfield and Water Treatment Plant Improvement Project. The second would be postpone the consideration of the resolution and give further direction to staff. The third would be to vote to deny the resolution and give further direction to staff. Staff recommends option 1. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have, and Mr. Bingston has been involved from the get-go, so he's deeply full of knowledge on this subject also.
Okay, any questions for staff? Okay, if not, is there any public comment?
Okay.
Norman, Madam Salina, I'll ask you, Mayor. Maybe I'm stretching it a little bit, but this does concern the water rights because the Smoky Hill River was stated. So that opened the door. This is a long-term issue that's going to pop up here. It's already popping up in the western states. It's in the courts. Look at your water rights. Who own these water rights? The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled who owns these water rights. You don't own them. So you better try and reduce your water usage because so many laws have been violated, and this is coming to the courts. Every one of these lakes in this state has to come out. They're already taking them out west. These lakes were built in violations of the agreements, the laws of the land. So you better look hard at this because I know where these dams are coming out.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, if not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I move we approve resolution number 20-7841, authorizing the city manager to execute agreements and authorizing the mayor to execute acceptances of the public utility easements for the South Wellfield and Water Treatment Plant Improvement Project.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7841. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0. That will lead us to item 7.2.
Item 7.2, resolution number 20-7844, authorizing the mayor to sign an order form entering into a 3-year agreement with QuickBase Incorporated for data management and process automation software.
Good afternoon. In 2016, we started taking a look at ways in which we could try to centralize some data that didn't necessarily fit into our records management system. Our records management system is robust and can handle criminal cases and accident cases, but as far as data that, and citations, but as far as some other data sets that we were wanting to look at outside of that, it's not set up to handle that. This product called QuickBase was identified. It's essentially a database system, and it's very easy to use, very customizable. And we initially started using the system to track our overtime submissions. Being a 24/7 agency, as I'm sure you can imagine, we have a lot of overtime submissions throughout the year. In fact, we average about 8,500 overtime submissions throughout the year. Initially, at that time, that process was a paper process where an employee would fill out a form. That form would be turned into their supervisor, who would sign off on it, and it would go to a clerk to be put into a database and access that one person developed and only one person had access to. So it was really hard for all of us in administration to see that data. That's what we first started out with the program. We started out with very few licenses, and we ran into an issue last year with another system that was developed by an employee that retired. It was a program that sat on the city server, and that system needed to be moved off that server because the server needed to be taken down, and nobody really in CT wanted to try to tackle that, is because they weren't familiar with how it was set up, and that employee was no longer here. So that was a fairly big project. That system we call Public Safety Web, and it brings together a lot of information, safety information, attempt to locate information. It's kind of a central hub for resources for officers, to where they can go to one place to look up information that they need to try to help them through the day, whether it's links to statutes, whether it's links to the city ordinances, administrative information that's put out, our fleet management, what cars are up, what cars need maintenance. And so we decided to go ahead and add some additional licenses because this seemed like a perfect fit, and we could customize it to something of our own. Some of the, as I mentioned, some of the bigger things that we use this QuickBase system for, as I mentioned, overtime. This year, we have been able to, through flexing out overtime submissions, been able to flex out over 2,000 hours of overtime and essentially made it regular time. A lot of that came back to the assistance of going to a 10-hour patrol schedule, which we're on now, has allowed us that flexibility. But under the old system, where you had one person that had a program in their office, the supervisors can't see that information and be flexing those hours out on a real-time basis. So it's been very beneficial for those submissions to be there. They can see it, they can plan ahead for their next shift, and when they can see about letting people off early, so we can flex out those submitted hours. As I mentioned, the PS Web system, it contains several things. That contains information sharing, the fleet management. We did some research on that a year or so ago, and to actually incorporate a fleet management system into our records management system had about an $8,000 initial setup fee, and then another $1,600 annual maintenance cost. We were able to incorporate this into our public safety web. It keeps track of our in-car video logs. It keeps track of our holding room logs. So we have to keep a log every time somebody is in a holding room. Different inspections that we do. And a lot of those entries that are made into that system are in turn used for proofs of compliance, used in court proceedings. For instance, if an attorney wants to know how long somebody was in one of our holding cells, that data has already been entered into the system and is tracked. Some of those things as well, as I mentioned, are inspections, are things that we have to show for proofs of compliance every year for accreditation to show that we're meeting the standards that they set forth for us. We also use it for a critical incident evaluation, and we've been doing that for use of force, for at least since 2018. Also, we've been using it for our pursuit evaluations. The statistics, as far as those two items, are essentially a few clicks away or generating reports, so we use the system for that as well. We also use it for asset management and maintenance records, as I'm sure you can understand, with weapons such as tasers, firearms, shotguns, and other things, that we have to keep meticulous records as far as the maintenance that's done on those. And those also are records that have to be provided for proofs of compliance for accreditation as well. We are starting to use that same asset management function to project life and how old some of our equipment is, so we can see for replacement for budgetary purposes how far we're kind of at the infancy of that, but we're getting more and more of our equipment in there, so we can have an idea as to the coming budget years, what needs to be done as far as budgeting. A recent program, the Special Needs and Identification Program, I'm not sure if you've heard of that or not, but it was a program that one of our dispatchers had came up with, and it allows the public to enter information on people that have special needs and provide information to us that we can put into our CAD system. So if we encounter them, that we have some instruction on maybe what condition that they have problems with, what they respond to, as well as if we need to contact somebody to respond to the scene, who that person might be. Well, of course, that information needs to be updated every year, and so some of that information is put into QuickBase, and when that year time frame is up, they get an automated email, as opposed to us printing letters, stuffing envelopes, that they need, that notification goes out and tells them that they need to contact us and verify that their information is correct. We also, another big program that we're using it with is for our applications processing. Once again, some of the automations that's involved previously, when we had individuals that were coming to test, we would print 40, 50 letters of invitation, fold them, stuff them, put them in envelopes, and mail them out. Now, once they're put into the system, the testing date comes up, they get an email saying the testing date is coming up. Please email Lieutenant Feldman that you'll be attending to reserve your slot. So a lot of automation, and a lot of things are being entered on the front end as opposed to paper going through 2 or 3 different hands. The information's done up front, and we don't have others that are entering that data. That helps also eliminate some errors. With the increase, our current agreement has been year to year. Looking to go to a 3-year agreement that has a 3% cost increase for year 2021 and 2022. So asking for the approval of Resolution 207844, authorizing the mayor to sign an order entering into a 3-year agreement. Option 2 would be to approve the resolution with amendments. Option 3 would be consideration, postpone the consideration to a later date, or vote to deny the resolution. And then there's some items listed here that we would need to take care of if that was to happen. I forgot to mention that the overall cost for the 3-year agreement is $70,849.23. It is year to year. We can, for non-appropriations or providing 30-day notice, terminate the agreement.
Okay, questions for staff?
Mr. Morton, Deputy Chief Morton, what do you know about the company? And the reason I ask that is occasionally I've run across companies that are really some guy working in his living room, and it looks legitimate, but and it is at the time, but it's not very long lived.
Sure. This company actually used to be owned by Intuit, who makes QuickBooks. They were purchased by a venture capitalist company, and they've since been purchased again by another venture capitalist company. They're used by municipality of Washington, D.C. pretty extensively, and a gentleman that I've actually spoken with with the New Orleans, their emergency communications center, came from D.C., and he's the manager of the emergency communications center, and they use it in New Orleans as well. So it's a large company.
Have they given you a customer's list of any kind?
They have some listed on their website, yes,
Okay.
but most of them are confidential unless they get consent to share that.
Just 3 questions. The budgeted amount for this year was $4,500?
That's correct.
Is that because you're using just a limited part of the total arsenal of what this system can do? I know there's a big difference between the 4,500 and the 20,000.
Last year, when we went through the budget process, we hadn't increased the number of licenses that we needed. That came about in the fall of last year, and we offset the cost increase that we had to pay last year within the department's budget. And the same thing will happen this year if you approve to proceed.
Okay, and when you say 100 licenses, is that reference to the 100 applications or the 200 use? The license is the same as the user?
Yeah, and we're going from a license-based subscription to a usage-based subscription. Previously, we had 100 licenses, and so now we're going to move to a usage-based system. Those specifications are listed on the order form. We'll actually have 200 licenses, which is more than enough for us to use.
Right, so then, on average, each one of those licenses would have 1,000 requests per year? The 200,000 read requests,
Right.
is that?
Right. We're not going to use 200 licenses.
Okay.
We'll probably be closer to 115.
Okay, and the other question is, if at the end of the 3 years you decided you wanted to move on to someone else, where is that data being stored or kept?
The data is kept by them in a cloud service. That's one of the other benefits that I forgot to mention, in that this isn't something that we need any computer technology resources, no hardware resources as far as they're concerned. We can retrieve the data. It might take a little time, but the data belongs to us.
So if at the end of the 3 years, do we have a way of downloading or storing that data, or do you have permanent ownership of, hate to talk about the cloud as a physical structure, but where is this data, and how would you get it for year 4?
The data is on their servers. They have 2 different data storage facilities that I assume that they contract with someone else. They're in 2 different locations for redundancy within the United States. Both servers are in the U.S. That data would have to be exported from their servers. Would probably all of it would export into Excel, and we would have to purchase a city server probably, or some other means to store that data internally then.
Okay. So theoretically, it shouldn't be a problem for 3 years, but if you want it to move, we'd have to have a place to put the information, or secure place to store it here.
Right, and then maintenance internally if we were to move back to the city to have that done.
And have a way to access the information, yeah.
Right, a different
Okay.
program.
Okay, thank you.
So basically, this is a $25,000 resource that's going to be in addition to your budget year in and year out?
Yes.
I mean, we're going to use this going forward, right?
Yes.
Commissioner Hodges, any questions?
You know, I'm sorry, Commissioner Hodges.
No, I don't have any questions, thank
You
you.
know, I will admit I have some concerns about data integrity and who owns it and how we can get it if something happens to the company and how we can use it. You know, just because we can download it doesn't mean we can use it. It's got to run on something. And I just wonder if we shouldn't go back and see if we can get a little more explicit. You know, the agreement attached really doesn't address any of that. So, and I have, unfortunately, I have some experience with that, and it can be quite daunting. For example, when you call the company for support and the Internal Revenue Service answers the phone, that's not a good sign. You know, and that can happen to any company, you know, because we have no control over their internal management. I just want to see, I want to know there's something solid in place so that this just doesn't disappear on us after we're a year or two into this, that there's at least a way to recover it and a way to use it if we need to at that point. And I'm not sure what that would take. I'm a little bit, I see what you're doing and I agree with it, and I know that the issue of having little bits of software that's developed by staff to take care of this problem or that problem, and then they leave and nobody knows what to do with it. I understand that problem. I guess I just have a lot of concern about how this works down the road should something unexpected happen with the company or whatever.
And I understand that, but I'm not so sure that that wouldn't be the same with any company.
You know.
I can tell you from experience that probably the best experience we've had and that I've had in my career was transitioning to our building and development services software. And from the software provider that we were transitioning from, they were asked to export the data in an ASCII, delimited file format that then the company that we were transitioning to could make sense of and import into their database. It wasn't a one-for-one transition. There was some information there that couldn't get transitioned over. There was information that the new database is collecting that the old one didn't have, but there was at least a process. As far as an agreement, I think the only thing that we could do is beef up the language that it is our data, we own it, we have access to it. Our ability to use it is going to be more dependent on whatever we're transitioning to than what we're transitioning from. And admittedly, any software company, if they crash, if they stop answering the phone, our access to the data is only as much as we can enforce that provision of the agreement. But I understand the concern. If that's the only concern, you might be able to approve it, provided that sufficient language is added to the agreement to provide that we own and will have access to our data at the time that we discontinue use of the software. We can work up an added provision to add to the agreement, and if you make that a condition of your approval, we wouldn't proceed unless they agree to it.
Did our IT department review the proposal or have any concerns?
I have not had them, I didn't have them review this proposal, no. But in the past, I've communicated when Mr. Rolfs was still here. Over the years, I've communicated with him, shared with him the security audit that's been done on the company, and I've shared that information with him previously.
Do we
I guess the other thing that I would mention too is that we've been doing business with this company now for 4 years, so it's not like a startup type company.
Current employee Rita Stevenson is serving in the interim role. She's familiar with QuickBase and just our use of QuickBase.
And the reason I ask is, a person with that background is going to know what questions to ask. I wouldn't really know. I wouldn't be smart enough to even know what questions to ask, what things to look for, and just,
But I really do think it comes down to a contract provision about our ownership and access to our data, and that we've had that language in other software contracts. The mechanics of it are very much exporting it out from them and then importing it into whatever it is you want to try to make use of it, and it's a little premature to say, other than we just need we need to be granted access to that data so we can take advantage of it somewhere out in the future when we want it.
I had a couple questions. So there's no new hardware needed at all? I mean, we're not buying a server. We can access all this with our current laptops or desktops or whatever we use.
That's exactly right. And
Okay.
that's been one of the benefits, quite frankly, is the previous system that we had that was sitting on the city's network, we had some issues with the officers being able to access that in the patrol cars. And this is pretty much been seamless. That's also another concern with a lot of times with using Access as well, is because they have some security problems in that you may have somebody using Access 2013, Microsoft Access 2013, and you have somebody using Microsoft Access 2010, and the one on 2010 can't access any of that data. And yeah, once again, it's been pretty seamless, been pretty easy to use. I can tell you, Commissioner Davis, that when we were looking at putting this public safety web system together last year, before we went into it, I consulted with Jack Rolfs, and he thought it was a good move to do it. Because his people didn't have the time to work on it for us.
This year's budget was $4,500. What's our budget been running for this type of software?
I'm sorry?
You stated that the budget for 2020 was $4,500. Has that been what we've been paying on an annual basis for the last 4 years, or was that?
That's correct.
Okay. So we're taking a fairly substantial increase. Couple other questions, and again, I like the fact that you talked about you had the critical incident evaluation, that you could pull up use of force reports, mainly since this seems to be a hot topic right now. The special needs information, is that done by name or by address, or can it be done by both? I mean, I could see that being very important.
That's actually, the portion of that the officers would access is done by name and probably address both in CAD. I'm not completely familiar with that. The portion that we have in QuickBase is more along the lines of the person's name, email address, and when do you need to update this information with us. So the automation goes through and says, okay, it's July 13th, I need to send them an email to remind them to update the information with us.
But this software will pull up, if you have an incident with an individual and they have a special needs, it will tell you that?
Right, and that's
Perfect.
actually in our CAD system.
Okay.
That's in a completely different system.
That's a different system?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I was trying to look at what would simplify, if this simplified you getting reports like, tracking arrest records and that type of thing. Is that on the CAD? That's not on this system?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Okay. As far as tracking arrest records and those type of
Yeah, arrest
items,
records.
is that on the CAD or is that on
That's-
this system?
It's part of our records management system, which is under the same company, Tyler Technologies, which has our CAD as well. That's under that system. As far as the use of force is concerned, that isn't something that the records management system has within it that we can use. So previously, we would fill out a paper form essentially to track use of force, and we'd have one person with access to an access database that would put that in. And so as far as from an administrative perspective, if you wanted information on that, you had to go to that person to get that information. As opposed to now, I can look at a dashboard and see whatever charts we put up as far as usage and things of that nature.
And Deputy Chief Morton might have touched on this, I don't recall, but a lot of this functionality that he's describing, we build ourselves, and then we stand it up. And so he's described what it's doing today as we deal with open source data for police and the Law Enforcement Advisory Board, as well as just additional tracking. It's a platform that gives us opportunities to build more.
Well, and one of the things Mr. Schrag had mentioned to me a week or so ago was a question relative to whether or not it could be used to track citation data and issuance of citations via race, sex, things of that nature. I've started working on building that. It's not complete, but yeah, it's going to be able to produce that information for us relatively quickly, as opposed to intermittently taking a look at that data, is that we can see it regularly, and even the system will allow you to create reports and have those reports emailed to certain people, maybe the chief, me, and the 3 captains at the first of the month or something like that.
That was kind of the questions I was trying to get at as far as building that, being able to build it to get those arrest records, whether it's based on race, is it local, is it out of town, those type of things that you can compile the information to figure out, what that looks like. Again, if the overtime submission and tracking works right, it probably pays for itself.
Well, I did a little calculation today on the 2,089 hours that we've been able to flex out this year. If we just used a base officer pay for that, not even counting it at 1.5 for overtime, it comes to about $44,000. And once again, there's some other things that are factored into that as well, is that we've had a decrease in overtime this year, partially due to the 10-hour shifts, partially due to things related to COVID, so I can't tell you that all of it's based on that, but it sure allows the supervisors to manage that overtime in real time.
Any other questions? Any comments from the public? Okay, if not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action or further discussion.
Mayor Hoppick, I move we approve Resolution 20-7844, authorizing the mayor to sign an order form entering into a 3-year agreement with QuickBase Incorporated for data management and process automation software at a cost of $70,849.23. Add one more sentence, sir. On a provisional basis, allowing for the city manager to have proper language added to secure our access to information, or if you'd like to improve the wording of that.
I'd say confirm our ongoing ownership of our data, as well as access.
Like that better. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off. Second with the amendment.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7844 with the amendment. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes 5-0. Okay, that brings us to 7.3.
Item 7.3, authorize the fire department to utilize sole source purchase of a remounted ambulance.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. Kevin Royce, Fire Chief. I'm here today to ask authorization to enter into a sole source contract with Osage Ambulance to remount one of our existing ambulances. However, I should have been here before you regarding this in mid-March, earlier this year. Let me explain why. Get this up. Our approved 2019 remount ambulance was delivered in early March. At that time, we proceeded to go ahead and order the 2020 remount. I should have presented this request for your authorization to you at that time before confirming the order for the 2020 remount. Ms. Pack, Debbie, thank you, discovered this omission last week and brought it to my attention when she was preparing to process this and could not locate the blue sheet. This oversight was not intentional or malicious or deliberate by any means, and was not done to disrespect this body. As department head, I take full responsibility for this mistake, and I assure the city manager and the commission this will not occur again. Beginning last year, the department moved to a remount program. This is when we returned one of our existing ambulances back to Osage and Lynn, Missouri, and they removed the patient module, update it, rebuild it, and remount it to a new Dodge Ram 450 chassis. This remount program provides shorter build times, minimizes the cost to Salina County, and ensures lifetime warranties on the patient module by this manufacturer, and so far it's been extremely successful. This 2020 approved remount that I'm asking for approval today is virtually complete and nearly ready for delivery. At this time, in an effort to resolve this issue, as best as possible, given the circumstances at this point, we've postponed delivery until authorization is granted. This 2020 sub-CIP budget for this allocates $180,000. As you'll see by a small chart there, this remount came in at $184,600. However, the department at this time can cover the overage with its EMS equipment line item. We were obviously a little over-aggressive in our potential savings when we budgeted for this last year. In 2019, you can see compared to 2020. However, we were assuming the possibility that the power load system, which we added to the one last year, would have been approved for 2020 sub-CIP funds where we could retrofit all of our ambulances that way, and that was not. This cost is billed to Salina County pursuant to the terms of an interlocal agreement involving EMS services, and that has been the practice for many years. Recommended action to authorize the department to proceed to sole source the remounting of one ambulance for 2020 to Osage Ambulance in the amount of $184,600. 2, do not authorize the sole source remounting and provide direction to the fire administration. Fire department recommends option 1. Would be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Mayor, at this point, I think I would like to have an executive session. So I will move that the City Commission recess an executive session for, let's give it 20 minutes until 5:20 to discuss the subject of non-elected employees' performance related to this agenda item based upon the need to discuss personnel matters of non-elected personnel pursuant to KSA 75-4319B1. The open meeting will resume in this room at, I said, let's say 5:20.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second, to move into executive session for 20 minutes, returning at 5:20. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, we will be back here in 20 minutes.
We'll adjourn into room 105, and this is an agenda item on your agenda, but we expect action as it relates to this topic when we return.
Chief Royce on the remount.
You know, Chief, how many times can we reuse a body, for lack of a better term? You say it's refurbished, but sooner or later they're going to run out of gas, I presume.
Well, they really just used a shell for this.
Okay.
They physically strip it down to just, that's why the lifetime warranty goes with it with Osage.
Okay.
And they literally rebuild,
So-
rewire, redo everything. You get a brand new box
Okay.
on the inside.
Right, right. So how does this cost compare to a completely new unit?
We were quoted $243,000 for a completely unit. And the last 2 times we've gone out to bid, only one manufacturer has actually bid, and that's been Osage.
Okay.
One other question. I think not too long ago, and I don't know whether it was the Stryker Power Cot or some cot we talked about, seemed like
correct.
about 2 months ago.
In December.
Okay, well, time flies fast. All right. And it seemed like the knees bees as far as the only way that you'd want to do it, as far as transporting and lifting. Would it be losing as far as functionality, risk of injury to firefighters and EMS by not having the cot? And the second part of that question, obviously, is how much does a cot cost?
A cot is usually, the cot itself is usually between $16,000 and $18,000. Now, the power load system, and this is kind of confusing, in the blue sheet I tried to differentiate. The power load system is a system that's constructed inside the patient module. It's the actual mechanism that takes all the weight off and moves the patient out and moves the patient in. The cot itself is obviously what the patient is on.
Okay.
Two
So you
separate.
have, the mechanism is included.
In this one, we did. You'll notice we took the cot out to try to get to budget. We were hopefully anticipating that in 2020, we asked for 5 sets of the power load system to retrofit all our ambulances, and we didn't get that.
That was just the lifting system, not
Yes, sir.
the cot. Okay, I'm
So
straight
so
now.
if the cot's
Okay.
not included, do we have another one we're
We
going to
do.
use
We
with
do
this
have an
unit?
extra. Yeah, we
Okay,
keep
so
it.
we're just not getting a new one, and we've got one to use?
Exactly. We
Okay.
try to keep and maintain a regular equipment schedule maintenance rotation. We try to always order an ambulance with a brand-new cot. So that would put our oldest cot at only 7 years old. And we do get credit and resale, or not resale, but we do get credit when we turn that back in.
By the way, having ridden one of these things, it's really kind of fun to ride if you don't think about why you're there.
I'll just take your word for it, if that's okay.
We did, there is, I'm doing some research right now, there is a possibility with the CARES Act of, it may be a stretch, but it does include some forms of emergency medical equipment that the possibility to pursue getting those retrofitted power load systems under that. It might be a stretch trying to tie that in there, but it's the guidelines just came out today, and they're kind of very vague. But that's obviously a possibility. That in that case we could retrofit all the ambulances. Then anytime we did a remount, we would only be paying for the remount, the chassis, and the cot, which would obviously be well below or closer to that 180 to 184. Versus the 215 the year before is what we.
And are we doing these on an annual basis?
We do
Pretty
them
much?
every year.
How many ambulances do we have in service?
We have 4 frontline ambulances and 3 reserve ambulances. We keep 7 at a time. Now, one of the things also that we used to do is when we would buy a new one, we'd obviously have to get rid of physically get rid of. Now, we're not doing that. So obviously, we're just reusing them each time with a new chassis.
Any other questions? Any public comment? Okay, with that, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor Hoppick, I move that we authorize the department to single source the remounting of 1 ambulance for 2020 to Osage Ambulance in the amount of $184,600.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to authorize the department to single source the remounting of 1 ambulance for 2020 to Osage Ambulance, the amount of $184,600. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. That will bring us to 7.4.
Item 7.4, Resolution Number 20-7845, addressing the meeting schedules of City of Salina, Kansas subordinate boards and commissions, and repealing Resolution Number 20-7824 and Resolution Number 20-7834.
Mr. Scragg.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I assume that you recall that in response to the mass gathering limitations and the staffing issues associated with COVID-19, we passed the 2 resolutions that were referenced. The intention of those resolutions was to acknowledge our inability to conduct meetings according to the mass gathering limitations, and then the second one identified that development services had need for me, and the mass gathering limitations had been adjusted at this point. It identified that the Development Services Department had need for meetings, but was still challenged from a staffing standpoint in terms of work sharing, so it proposed an alternate schedule of meetings. At this point, with mass gathering limitations lifted and we're down to face masks and we're identifying the need for meetings of other subordinate boards and committees, and we're kind of settled into a work sharing schedule. We think we can bring some of the other boards and commissions back online. What we have for you is resolution number 20-7845. It essentially calls or puts the other subordinate boards and committees back into a schedule and rotation like they were before. It still retains that modified schedule for development services out of recognition of the medium volume and load that the development services deals with on an annual basis, as well as the continued impacts of work sharing. We've had conversations. We recognize from the development community there's a desire to get back on as normal a schedule as possible, and we're mindful of that, but given the number, we have an employee furloughed, we have a number of employees on work share, and given the extensive nature of the packets for development services that have to be prepared, we're still proposing that they stay on that revised schedule. The one thing that I did want to point out to you is there is the language in the resolution that identifies the fact that we trying to find the language back, I apologize. It does build some discretion in that, provided that sufficient measures to comply with applicable requirements and guidance are in place, and further provided that sufficient necessity exists to merit conducting each meeting, and if in the city manager's discretion a meeting cannot be conducted in compliance with applicable executive orders or any other applicable federal, state, or local orders, or sufficient business does not exist to merit a meeting under the circumstances, a meeting may be canceled or postponed. So it does grant some discretion to the city manager to kind of react to whatever regulations might be in place and our ability to meet those, as well as if we don't have sufficient business, recognizing that we're trying to kind of balance competing interests, we could still cancel or postpone based on the specifics of a particular board or committee. So as mentioned, the resolution 20-7845 repeals the two resolutions that were adopted previously, spells out the schedule for development services, and then reinstitutes the schedule for the other subordinate boards and committees. I'd be happy to, and as usual, your options are to approve the resolution as presented. You could approve it with amendments as you deem appropriate. You could postpone consideration, which would allow the current approach to remain in effect. You could vote to deny the resolution, and that would have the community development services schedule remain in effect, and other subordinate boards and committees would continue not to meet until you took further action. Staff's recommendation is to approve the resolution, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for staff? Public comment? Okay, if not, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor Hoppick, I move that we approve resolution number 20-7845.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 20-7845. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That passes 5-0. Okay, that brings us to 7.5.
7.5, budget discussion.
Okay. We wanted to allow this time so that we could complete the discussion if we didn't complete it during our study session. So we are at revenues. If I can get the...
Before you get started, since you're looking for your place, I just had one question about the pay plan. So are we planning on keeping everybody either furloughed or work reduced hours through the end of 2020? Or are we looking, what's our timetable on bringing people back?
So the revised plan that we brought to you wasn't necessarily everyone till the end of 2020. It was a break-even point that was calculated individually for each employee, accounting for basically if they were receiving a, for lack of a better word, windfall because of the $600 a week payment, trying to then take into account that upfront windfall and offset it with a reduced work share and a reduced paycheck, and then calculate an individual date to return to work.
Okay.
So certain employees, that break-even point extended into next spring, and we didn't want to carry it that far, so we capped everybody at 30 weeks, and then depending on individual circumstances, they may have a date that was earlier than that 30 weeks. Now, knowing what we know about April's sales tax data, the last conversation we had was our recommendation was to at least continue work share through July 25th, which is when the federal pandemic unemployment compensation ends, and that would give us a little bit more time to get May's numbers and see what we've got. I don't want to create false hope, but I'm certainly open to looking at the numbers and trying to bring people back sooner. We're going to have to look at, the finances, and it may be that we're then going to have to look at functions. We're hearing a lot about parks, mowing, and maintenance. That might be a high priority to bring back sooner rather than later. I've had some conversations about water customer accounting being closed on Friday and the inconvenience that creates. That, we might start to then individually see if we can start bringing people back. It creates a whole equity issue in that essential employees that continue to work didn't receive the $600 a week, didn't receive a windfall, and rather than break even, employees that come back early may actually come out financially ahead. Now, having said that, I have quite a few employees were emotionally upset to not be essential and to be furloughed and be put on work share. There's a lot of other considerations, but from an equity standpoint, there's only so much we can do in terms of balancing all these interests.
Yeah, I think we need to weigh that, bringing people back. Again, I've still stated, I think August is when we really find out where we stand, unless there's they talk about another wave of some, stimulus checks, so we'll see. But trouble is, August we won't know those numbers until October, so so I think we still need to be a little cautious, but.
Yeah, I agree, and admittedly, our accuracy is not going to be very good, but we will at least have been able to observe April and then see what our financial numbers look like.
Yeah.
Observe May, see what those financial numbers look like, and while we may not have June, July, and August numbers,
it may give us a little bit of
better sense of how they interrelate.
Yeah, so.
And the only thing I would add to that is that as we understood the program better, the latest date that we've calculated now is November 2nd.
Okay.
Because there was a 26-week maximum allowed for unemployment, so we backed everybody up to November 2nd was the last date that people would be out.
All right, thank you.
So the last section that we'll talk about is revenues. General fund revenue, as we all know, sales and use tax is 30% of our revenue in the general fund. These are from 2019. Property tax is 22%, franchise fees 12%, transfers 8%. So then we wanted to look at some of these top revenue numbers. Sales tax, as we know, has been going down for 2020 because of COVID. Historically, however, we've seen since we've implemented that these numbers have been rising. So we would anticipate as we get through COVID that hopefully those numbers will continue that trend. I will mention on the loss that we're showing here with the sales tax number, if you recall, the use tax number's gone up. So I think the last number that we presented to you was that we are pretty flat right now in 2020 as compared to 2019.
Would it make sense to somehow add the use tax in here?
We track it separately, and so we do have these tables.
I'm just saying, because what we're maybe losing in sales tax, we're gaining in that use tax. It'd be nice to know
how that calculates. Do we have those combined into one?
As far as dollars received, we could combine them, but converting them to
sales is hard.
That's where we run into an issue.
I gotcha.
Yeah. I knew there was some reason we had that.
Yeah. Of course, I want to know what money we're getting. Okay.
Right. Yeah, we could certainly combine them as far as tax dollars received, but not transfer them to sales.
Interesting to see as we go forward.
Right. Then we wanted to show how our revenues have been increasing over the past few years. In 2017, we actually collected a lower amount than 18, and then 19 went up to 8.5 million in the special sales tax fund. Our 18 number was a little lower than 17. We're budgeting for 2021. We've gone back, as I've mentioned before, to the 2019 actual, which is about $8.5 million, and about $13 million in the general fund. Franchise fees is another one of our large revenue in the types in the general fund, and this graphic shows how it kind of goes back and forth, but electric is our largest franchise fee. We're budgeting that back to the 2019. We budgeted higher in 2020, but expect that number to come down a little lower. Water and wastewater is flat because that's a number that we just transfer from the water and wastewater fund. The gas, we're budgeting back to 19, which is a little bit lower than the 2020 budgeted number for franchise fees. Property tax, our assessed valuations did not go up a lot in 2020. And a big reason for that was that we had a significant there was a significant reduction in personal property based on a, can't think of the word, appeal, thank you, in 2019. So when we looked at the 2020 budget numbers where we show that $2.7 million in pending exemptions, that $1.5 million of that was for a personal property exemption, and that actually did occur, so that number really reduced our number in the 2021 valuation. So we only saw our valuations go up by 0.34% in 2021. In 2020, we had seen a 4.26% increase. So in my mind, that's pretty flat at this point. As far as taxes levied, we levied $12 million for the 2019 budget, 12.2. We levied 13.3 for the 2020 budget. Now, this is the wrong page. This is a property tax calculation. This gets really complicated because there's so many, this is the pages that I gave you new ones. So you should have a set of 4 new pages that I left on your dais just before the meeting. And the reason for that was that there's some discussion about whether how to apply special assessment. What we had previously done was just put in the amount that we were actually paying for special assessment debt. But in reading the language and getting some direction from the state, their indication was that we could do that because that's what we had done before. However, it was probably in the best interest of the taxpayer that we only include the amount that's the difference between what we collect in special assessment revenues, and what we actually pay out in special assessment debt. And so that number was a reduction in that original calculation. So basically there's two methods to which we can raise the property tax based on the cap. The first part is based on the consumer price index. The state gives us that number. It's the average of the 5-year prior something CPI. That was 1.8% this year. So based on our levy of $13.3 million, we have the capacity to raise our taxes $239,682 in 2021. The other portion of the exemption is based on changes in value and things related to the valuation of your properties. So as we see, if we saw increased personal property, if we saw reductions in abatements or things like that, those are items that we can take advantage of to increase our tax. And that portion allows us an increase of $189,616. And then the increased property tax revenues, which are really the exemptions, those you're allowed for on the special assessment debt. You're also allowed to raise your taxes if you're budgeted for law enforcement and the fire department. And basically how it's calculated is if my budget is higher for the current year, the coming year, than it was for the prior year, then I can offset the difference by raising taxes. In our case, we're reducing our budget for those areas, so we don't have any capacity to raise taxes to cover those differences. So in total, we have capacity to change, based on the property tax lid, we have the capacity to change our taxes $467,533, which is about 1.044 mils. The 2020 levy was $13,315,000. If we decided to increase the levy based on that allowable amount, which basically it just means we do not have to go. If we go over that amount, we have to go out to an election. And that's really what the tax lid is all about. If we chose to raise it, we could go up to $13.783 million in our property tax. That's all the revenue. The next steps basically for us is on July 15th. We have a special study session on Wednesday that we're going to discuss issues and options. And all of you that have been through this before, it's where we go through each of these individual items like SDI, pay plan, comprehensive fees, and we discuss those individually, and we ask for your direction or a consensus on how you want us to budget those items, so that then we can prepare the budget, the draft budget for you to present to you next week. So that'll be the 15th. We'll talk about issues and options. The 20th, which is Monday, we'll present the draft budget, which is with all those changes that you give us. Where does the budget lie? On the 27th, we'll come back to you and request a publication date. And at that time, we must set our maximum mill levy rate and our maximum expenditures. So once we get to the 27th, we cannot go over those numbers. We can always go down, we can't go up. So on the 27th, that's when we're kind of locked into what we want our mill levy to be, a maximum mill levy and a maximum expenditure amount.
And that's without knowing what the values will be, correct?
We have the values.
Okay.
We have the values, which was what I showed here. Those values, however, do change.
That's what I was going to say.
They could change, but if you look at this screen, I think it's this one. One of these. I was noticing this earlier. When they gave us the information for 2020, which was this year's budget, the amount was $448,061,000. When they certified it in November, it was the top right-hand column, which is the $448,039.
Right.
So it only changed about $20,000 in that time frame. So they could still have appeals or something like that, exemptions that haven't been finalized in that time. In the time between in last year's evaluations, it didn't change that much. But what they'll do is if that changes, they'll change our levy to meet our tax needs. So is that what you're going to say? So if we say we need $10 million in taxes for the general fund, no matter what the valuation does, when they set that on November 1st, they'll match our tax dollars to a levy. And that's why sometimes we'll see that levy rate change, because it changes because the valuation's changed. But our tax dollars that we budget will stay the same.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Okay. So then on July 27th, that's when we'll come to you for that budget. We'll publish the budget on July 30th. We'll hold our public hearing and have our first reading to adopt the budget on August 10th. And then on August 17th, we'll have the second reading to adopt the budget, the position classifications, and the comprehensive fee schedule. And then we have to have that to the county by August 25th. And that's why, as Mr. Scrigg mentioned, we have a very tight calendar. It doesn't give us much time to get it all done, so. Is there anything that we can provide to you before Wednesday that will help you as we go into making these decisions on Wednesday? I will try to get you the actual issues and options information out, hopefully tomorrow, early, maybe. It's not a very big document, so I might just email it. But it at least tells you what we're what we're going to be discussing on Wednesday that
I
way.
guess I do not know the time of that Wednesday meeting.
2:30.
2:30? Thank you.
It's 2:30 to 5.
Okay, any
I
questions?
just want to say, considering the compressed time frame we find ourselves in with everything going on, I think you guys have done a great job in terms of putting this together, pulling the numbers and making them kind of make sense. It's very difficult to do, especially given the uncertainty.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Debbie and Tara have not turned down any request for any level of work or information, and they've continued to take a tidbit of information and make it into what it is here. So I certainly appreciate all their effort.
A lot of information.
A lot of information.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, that's all I have then.
Thank you, ladies. Good job. Okay, we have no development business. Any of the commissioners have any other business they'd like to bring forward?
I would like to make a request that at some point after we get through the budget process, I don't want to add to the load until then, that you bring us the purchasing policy so we can at least review that and see if, you know, it needs to be tweaked in our judgment to try to have a little better handle on what happens.
Certainly. It's been a task that is on our, near the top of our list in terms of a priority. I think we can certainly start with a study session to give you an overview of what the purchasing policy says, how it works, and then what we've been working on is preparation of suggested revisions to the purchasing policy improvements. So we can see what we can do there in terms of walking through that as well. And I do have another business item, if I may.
I just have one real quick, too.
Okay.
I just wanted to thank both city and county staff, and I think probably I'm directing this at Rachel Hind-Constantino, for putting out the FAQs on the mask ordinance. I found it incredibly helpful, and I can't tell you how many people I referred to it over the last week. So thanks to staff for putting this together and for putting the signage together so that we can give people the resources that they need. And as we work through this in the weeks ahead, it's my hope. I know that the city and the county and USD 305 have been working really closely together, and it's my hope that maybe we can bring Salina Regional into that conversation and, you know, produce some more educational materials, because I think there's a lot of not very good information about there, and we have such tremendous resources within our own community. It seems like we could really get some good information out there so that people know what we're dealing with globally, nationally, and actually locally, and the pressures that Salina Regional is experiencing right now.
So just to be clear, you're not in that message, you're not referring to administration of this. You're talking about statistics and
statistics, what, you know, like in terms of
cases.
What success looks like for Salina from not putting pressure on Salina Regional staff and their facilities, because we are a regional health center. I mean, we're not just taking care of a neighborhood within a city. I mean, we've got all of north central Kansas. So I think it's, we just need to be aware that it's not just the Saline County numbers that are impacting our hospital, it's other counties. And, you know, what can we all do to, aside from masking, what are some common sense things that we could do to slow the spread?
Good point.
Hey, Mr. Scragg, you had something?
Yeah, my item actually kind of relates to that. As we've fielded questions and tried to produce the FAQs, there's one thing in particular that has gotten staff's attention as we try to interpret it and give good guidance on the FAQs. So I'd like to walk you through it a little bit, tell you what my intended approach is, and if you disagree, then we might need to talk about how to amend the ordinance to clarify. But and not to make excuses, but to give you a little bit of background, we started with the governor's executive order, and then Wichita was a step ahead. City of Wichita was a step ahead of us in terms of adopting an ordinance that, with their Sedgwick County opting out of the governor's executive order, so we relied heavily on the city of Wichita's ordinance that they tried to mirror the governor's executive order, and then we made some local changes. So from the governor's order to Wichita to us, there is a little bit of a difference in terms of the wording and the approach, but for the most part, it very much mirrors the original governor's executive order. So there's 4 things that touch on, the topic is, on the one end of the spectrum, whenever you're inside a building, whenever as an individual you have to wear a mask, and whenever, if you're an operator of a business or a building, whenever anyone's inside your building, you're expected to require them to wear a mask. But then there's also provisions in all of these, governor's executive order down to our ordinance, that contemplate if you can or cannot maintain 6 feet of social distancing. And there's more conflict there than I would like. It's understandably creating confusion, and it's putting staff on the spot to provide an interpretation. So in order of strict interpretation to, for lack of a better word, more lenient interpretation, I wanted to walk you through 4 provisions of the ordinance as it's currently written. So the most, in my opinion, the most strict provision relates to businesses, and just for your just to remind you of the provision, it says all businesses, organizations, and nonprofit associations in the city of Salina must require all employees, customers, visitors, members, or members of the public to wear a mask or other face covering when. And as I said, I think the most strict language in the ordinance is when customers, members, visitors, or members of the public are in a facility managed by the business or organization. A very strict interpretation of that could be someone's in a business's front lobby, every employee and customer in the building, basement or otherwise, they all have to wear masks. I mean, there's no provision beyond that. You have someone in your building, everybody needs to wear a mask. The second most restrictive, again, is imposed on the businesses, and it's when employees are working in any space visited by customers, members of the public, or coworkers who are present at the time. We added who are present at the time, but nonetheless, it's whenever they're working in any space visited with someone else in the room. No provision for separation distances or any of that type of language. So then what I think is the next progression is, as it relates to individuals, all persons in the city of Salina shall cover their mouths and nose with a mask or other face covering when they are in the following situations. Inside any indoor public space where distancing of 6 feet at all times is not possible. So now there's an interjection of a 6-foot distance, and the expectation is you have to maintain the 6-foot distance at all times. And the fourth one is back on the business side of the provisions, and that's when employees are in any room or enclosed area where other people, except for individuals who reside together, are present and are unable to maintain a 6-foot distance except for infrequent or incidental moments of closer proximity. So now you have physical separation, and you have this consideration of whether it's infrequent or incidental, or whether it's prolonged. So I hope that makes sense to you in terms of it kind of covers the entire spectrum of wear masks at all times down to wear masks when you are not able to stay 6 feet apart and not able to avoid infrequent contact. In an effort, and our FAQs were, frankly, my first pass at trying to provide guidance on what that all means, and my focus was on that last section I read you about employees and 6-foot distance and incidental moments of proximity. But as over the weekend and today, as we looked at the conflicts within the ordinance in greater detail, the only way that I can make the current language make sense and say, here's an interpretation that I think balances all that, is to say that while there are strict provisions, there is contemplation of a more detailed and less strict standard. And Greg, I'm taking liberties with some legal concepts, but if you have to try to make all the provisions of this ordinance make sense, I can't get them to make sense if you always have to wear masks, and then there's all these scenarios in addition. The only way I can get it to make sense is to say that there's a general expectation of masks, but it ends up when you cannot maintain 6 foot of distance, and when you and that incidental moments of proximity are acceptable. So I'm telling you all that because I think in my role, trying to interpret the ordinance and administer it, that's the approach I'm comfortable taking as it's currently written. If you as a city commission disagree and you want something more specific, you want something more stringent, then staff would be happy to try to help you through amending the ordinance, but we would need guidance, and then we'd need to prepare an amendment for your consideration. That's a lot of information, and I'd be happy to try to go over it to however much you would like.
I can just give you my practical interpretation is that if I have to be less than 6 feet from someone that I don't cohabitate with, the mask is on.
Is on?
On.
Correct. Right.
Period. If I'm in a work area where people are usually somewhat spread apart, if the public is in that area, then the mask should be on. And that's my interpretation of the hospital's policy for our office. If we have a patient in the office, then anyone in the office here where that patient might go has to have a mask on for the entire time that patient's in the office.
So if you, just so I understand, in a hypothetical, if you have, I don't know, 50 people in offices spread across multiple floors, if you have a patient anywhere in that area, everyone has to wear the mask?
Well, it would be in my office suite for that one. So we have several suites in the building, so it just gets duplicated in each suite. But if there's a patient on the 3rd floor, we don't have to mask on the 2nd floor.
Okay.
Because the walls themselves become the barriers.
Right.
If we don't anticipate patients being in the office that day, and we are actually well more than 6 feet apart from each other, 3 people in 3 different rooms, there's no practical reason for us to have the mask on, because we high and by, but it's
Right.
We're not spending that much time next to each other. If we are, then we put the mask on.
Some of the difficult scenarios that are being raised that we struggle to, interpret this clearly is you've got people in a work area and a client is passing through on their, with an employee on their way to a conference room, and so they're walking down a hallway past employees in cubicles. Or the other scenario is you get to a conference room and everyone can separate by 6 feet. Can they take their masks off? And I mean, I understand the expectations are all the way across the spectrum. I'm trying to balance conflicting provisions within the ordinance. And so it's one of two things. You as a governing body can provide additional clarification on exactly what you want, and we can amend the ordinance, or without amending it, I feel like that provision for the 6 foot social distancing and infrequent proximity kind of mitigates some of those other provisions, and the only way I can get the entire ordinance to make sense is to rely on that 6 foot infrequent proximity approach.
It very often boils down to how well you know or trust the other people in that room, even other.
Yeah.
Now, 6 feet is, if you watch people sneeze and those powder with the air, 6 feet is like sitting next to somebody. So it's, well,
admittedly,
look at us in here.
Well,
Admittedly, the original language was if you are in a space that a customer may visit at some point in the future, you need to wear a mask by yourself. So the most conservative approach is it's in the air, it's in the HVAC, it's in the system long-term, wear a mask. But then there's a lot of provision elsewhere about just keep 6 foot of separation and don't be in close proximity for too long.
And that's something where, when I mentioned teaming up with Salina Regional, I feel like that's something that, I mean, we have an infectious disease person on staff, both a physician and like a nursing director. And I mean, I think that's the kind of information that would be helpful for me, because I don't have that knowledge. And in your example about the client that would be walking past cubicles, I would hope that the client would care enough about the company that he's doing business or she is doing business with, that they would be masked in going to the conference room for their meeting.
I can assure you that's not the premise of any of the questions I'm getting asked. It's on the other end of that expectation.
Well, in addition to the hospital staff, we have a county medical officer.
So
we have expertise that probably should propose answers to those questions.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. With respect to the ordinance that's adopted and having to give people answers yet tonight and tomorrow morning, just to be clear, in hopes of making it easy for you as the governing body, my intention would be, as it's currently written, 6 foot of social distancing and infrequent moments of proximity is the standard contemplated in the ordinance. I can go forward with that. If you'd like additional information, you have a couple of options. If you would like additional information from hospital, health department, we can certainly ask for that. Or if you would like a different approach, then we need to amend the ordinance and figure out the approach that you as a governing body want to take.
And this is probably, I don't have the ordinance in front of me, so I apologize. So would that mean that if I went to Dillon's, for example, and I said, well, I think I can maintain 6 feet of distance between myself and other customers, so therefore I don't need to wear my mask?
We have people asserting that. I don't know, it's hard for me to agree that you could maintain social distancing in an uncontrolled environment like that. And if you look at the frequently asked questions, it tries to get to the fact of your ability to control your interaction with others and maintain 6 feet of social distancing. So I don't know how I'd word the FAQ exactly, but in an uncontrolled environment like that, or KDHE lead sled, or whatever the case may be, I don't think that's a fair assumption that you could manage your interactions. But people have already asserted it and are trying to make that case.
To your point, you have no control of someone coming up next to you.
Right.
You can control where you go, but I mean, in a grocery store, it's be a neat experiment to try, but you'd be hard pressed to.
Earlier in the evening, I saw Mr. Michael Spicer here, and I don't know if he or someone on the theater's behalf ask about the performers wearing masks. Is there any kind of an exception to address that?
Well, he and I traded emails, and I was under the impression, and he may have misunderstood the format of the meeting, but I was under the impression that he was going to approach you to kind of reiterate his request for an exemption. And there are other inquiries about, what about this scenario, what about that scenario? So you're aware of the emails that are coming to you at the City Commission email address. At the FAQ email address, there's been a very limited number, I think 8 by noon today, 8 different individuals contacted us. So exemptions are a whole nother conversation, but there's not discretion built in for me as the city manager or staff to, respond to requests for exemptions. Each one of those would take an amendment to the ordinance. And to Mr. Spicer's point, there's a provision for athletics, but not provision for dancing and performing. And I would be the first to admit, all along, there's been the presumption that athletics needs to go on, and if masks are possible, then make use of them. If they're not, the presumption is go ahead and compete in that athletic event without masks. But that's been the guidance from day one.
I look at I feel for the community theater, I really do, but I look at the spread, like from choirs. It's just been, church choirs have just been, if you have one infected person, it seems like it just runs rampant through the rest of the group. And again, that's kind of where, I've seen the charts about, the risk assessment, going to the grocery store is not that risky, going to a bar, extremely risky, and it has kind of everything laid out in between. But I think that's another case where personally, I don't feel like I have enough knowledge to make a call on a specific exemption without, talking to somebody who knows a lot more about how the particles are spread, how far they can go.
And
I would ask that we, be able to have a virtual panel where we could ask questions or something, but I'd love to have some way to reach out and get more information from the people that are dealing with this in the front lines. Because we do have people hospitalized and we have people in the ICU. And, yeah.
I think the way you approach it, I'd written down 3 things as you were reading the discrepancies in the report. And for me, mask if you're less than 6 feet from someone, unless it's, your spouse or person you live with. Mask when the public is present. And the approach is, I need to have a mask on any time I could give the virus to somebody else.
Within 6 feet or beyond 6 feet?
Well, really, anytime. If I'm running laps in this room and I'm exercising and I'm breathing heavy, then this whole room is at risk.
Yeah.
But certainly, anybody less than 6 feet, mask on. I mean, it's just...
Well, and the reason I asked the question is, I guess my level of comfort, given the way the ordinance is written presently, is that 6 feet separation. If you as a governing body want to clarify that and have it be something other than that, then I think we need to amend the ordinance.
I think the 6 feet is for lack of a better term, industry standard for social separation now.
Yeah, pretty commonplace. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I really want to bring to your attention as the governing body the interpretive difficulty we're having, my proposed interpretation of the ordinance as it's currently written, and if you want to give alternate direction, I wanted you to have that opportunity.
I think your approach accomplishes the goal of most of the people masking most of the time. They're close enough to somebody that they could spread the virus if they had it. I mean, that's where we're trying to get to.
Any comments on this end?
I think I made a comment at the meeting is what we want to get to is if you're within 6 feet of somebody, wear a mask. I mean, that's pretty simple and straightforward, and I still don't understand why we actually adopted all the complicated language because I think it is confusing. If you're within 6 feet of somebody, wear a mask. Inside, outside, doesn't matter. The other issue, the other question I have, I guess not an issue, is when we require businesses, we say businesses must require people present to wear a mask. What does that mean? Does that mean they're required to post a sign noticing them that there is a requirement? Some do that, and it's apparently fairly successful. I visited the same 6 businesses I did before we did that, and compliance went up from less than 50% to probably 98%. So it is having an effect. But I do think that the simpler interpretation we can put on it, the better off we are. We're not going to hit 100% of every circumstances, and you're always going to have somebody who makes that judgment and say, I can go to the grocery store and never be within 6 feet of somebody. Well, that's not likely. It's unless it's midnight and the store's deserted.
And you self-checkout.
But if we can get to where we're addressing, where 90% of the people who exercise common sense will say, I need a mask, and I think simply saying, if you're within 6 feet of somebody, wear a mask. That's, and that's whether it's inside a business or inside of a public gathering place. Obviously, if you're out in the open and you're riding a bicycle or running or walking your dog, probably not. You might occasionally come close to somebody, but it's certainly in passing and there's not an extended exposure. So, we hit 90% of the exposures. We're doing pretty good. And so I think the simpler we can make it, the better off we are.
That's what I said last week. Said that first thing, if you look at the minutes. I've had people call me, I said, use common sense. I agree with Commissioner France, we're not going to hit 100%. If we get even 70 or 80% that follow the rules, that's 70 or 80% less people we have that have the opportunity to spread the disease. It's still just weird that the 5 of us sit here wearing masks. If we all want it, which we can't do, but if we all wanted to go have supper together, we'd walk over to Blue Sky, we could all sit down at the same table and take our masks off and eat for an hour. That's an exception. And I've seen it happen, and I've seen it at places where somebody's sitting at a table and they're drinking, and they're not out of compliance with the ordinance, but so all we can do is do what we think's best. And I think, Mike, you can't come up with an answer for everybody. And, we do it at our office maybe different than Clark Mize and Linville does it, but we're trying to do the best we can to protect our customers and stuff. And that's all I can say is just tell people, if you're within 6 foot, wear a mask. They tell you that the 6 foot's more important than a mask, probably. So let's just try to do the best we can. Hope the public will use good common sense. I have noticed in the short time we've done it that masks are much more prevalent inside than outside. I think when you get to that outside environment, people feel safer and you see a lot less masks, even if there's groups together. I saw that several times this weekend. So hopefully what we're doing is, I don't know if that helps you any.
It helps a great deal. I wanted to communicate to you.
I like your line about the common sense, though.
Yeah,
seriously, and if you are in an environment where you can't control the interactions, or, it might be appropriate for a receptionist at Mike's office or at Clark Mize Linville to be masked up, but the people who are working away from that common area, no.
And if you look at the ordinance, it talks about except for infrequent or incidental moments of closer proximity. Now, who defines that? To me, if I'm walking by somebody quickly, do I fall under that? Because, as I said last week, I still have an issue with the quarantine when they talk about you have to be in proximity to somebody for 10 minutes. That's not incidental or infrequent, proximity. So there's a lot of contradictory things out there, whether both on the virus and both on what you should do. Let's just try to use, common sense. And I'm going to quote my wife, if she's listening, good for her. But, she says, common sense is a flower that doesn't grow in everybody's garden. That's our problem. If everybody had it, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this. So
I've never heard that before.
I do
that's a good one.
believe peer pressure is working. I know people that weren't going to wear a mask that actually saw one of them at Dillon's the other day, and he had it on. I don't think he was smiling underneath it, but he did have it on. So I believe, whether you're 3 years old or you're 63-year-old, I think peer pressure will have some effect. So anyway.
That's very helpful. I didn't want to put you on the spot and have you tell me how you fix all this. What I want to do is say, here's how I intend to proceed. If you want to do something different, give you the opportunity to
I'd leave it the way it is.
As
I said last week, I think it's a poorly written ordinance. Came out of Topeka, not our, we adopted it, but I still think it's poorly written because, we're getting a lot of calls. I've even got a calls as you have from an attorney going, how do you interpret this? And I said, I don't. I'm just going to do what I think's best. So
if I could add one related topic, and that is, I've been reluctant to put it on your agenda and force you to have a very difficult conversation about a topic you may not even want to take up, but it continues to come up as something we may need to discuss. And the county commission took the approach of they put it on a 2-week cycle to revisit. There was some mention in this group, I think last week, that had some merit. If you want to give me any direction on what you would like on your future agendas, how you'd like to approach it, that would be helpful in terms of having it on the agenda when you expect it to be there and not forcing it on you when you don't.
I mentioned last week about putting a date on it, and no one seemed to, and it's something that we're going to be able, I guess, to look at the numbers every week. I mean, I honestly believe that this is a roller coaster ride that we're on, and without somebody coming up with something that's going to do away with this until we get some kind of a treatment that, we come out of we do this for 4 weeks, things look great, we may go back up. I mean, that's why I'm glad I'm not in the school system.
Well, and that's going to be the big test.
I don't know how they possibly, get through a school year with what we have until we get,
because it's not just students, it's a lot of parents go to the school
and
twice a
teachers.
day,
You got teachers
drop the
that are
kids
gonna
off and pick them up. So that's when things really get mixed up.
Well, and I think we all got the email, I think it was from the city commission site, from a teacher who said, I'd appreciate it if you all would approach this with your goal being to get the kids back in school safely this fall. And, so from where I'm sitting, until we start to see a pretty significant decline in cases, I just, I think that we've got the mask ordinance, and I worry about if we set times to revisit it every week, every 2 weeks, whatever, then we're going to have a lot of the same people saying the same things, and it's not going to be something that advances the conversation. It's just it just gets discussed to death, and we have to, just keep ripping that Band-Aid off and putting it back on. So,
and I appreciate that. I'm very reluctant to just unexpectedly place it on your agenda for you. Now, if something comes along in the way of a governor's executive order or a county commission action that we must respond to, and I have no reservation of placing it on your agenda, but just as a ongoing policy / community discussion, I'm going to be looking to you as the governing body to give me an indication you want to take it up again before I just stick it on your agenda.
Well, if you could keep us updated with current, with the current information.
Numbers, okay.
Meeting by meeting, that would be useful to me. I don't want to have to research those things.
And we do have a county health department director who's staying on top of this and communicating regularly.
Okay.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Scragg. Okay, with that, we have a executive session we need to move into. How long do we need?
I've heard about that. 20 minutes? 20 minutes?
20 minutes, okay.
All right. Mr. Mayor, I move the city commission recess into executive session for 20 minutes to discuss the subject of the city's claim arising from the detection, isolation, and cleanup of asbestos materials in the basement and basement stairwell of Fire Station Number 2 with special legal counsel Eileen Monk via telephone and the city's legal counsel based upon the need for consultation with an attorney for the public body which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship pursuant to KSA 75-7319B2. The open meeting will resume in this room at 6:40. I'm going to give us a minute to walk down to 6:43.
6:43.
second.
We have a motion and a second to move into executive session for 20 minutes. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
And it
We'll be
should
back
be-
in this room, and
No,
there is a chance for possible
We'll
action.
conduct the executive session at 1:05, and the agenda includes the possibility of action.
Is this thing in here set the second?
Okay, we are back in session. We have no action to take at this time. So with that, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn?
Second.
Motion is second to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, see you next week.